What is it to lose your identity? To first have difficulty performing everyday tasks, all the way to being unable to recognize even yourself. This terrifying mental experience is one undertaken by 10 million more people on average worldwide each year in the form of dementia, and it is as terrifying as it is fascinating. But how could we, as relatively sane individuals, conceive of the deeply introspective experience that is dementia? Well, to me, there are two main avenues through which we can perceive the deteriorating mind: science and art, and by no means are they mutually exclusive. But firstly, let's get some of the science into our heads. Dementia is the loss of cognitive functioning, thinking, remembering, reasoning, and behavioral abilities. Signs and symptoms of dementia result when once healthy neurons or nerve cells in the brain stop working, lose connections with other brain cells, and die. While everyone loses some neurons as they age, people with dementia experience a far greater loss in what can be dubbed as synapse retrogenesis, with this lovely word relating to the theory of retrogenesis, which suggests that the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease deteriorate functionally and cognitively in the reverse order of how their brains developed from birth. Often people with late-stage dementia are described as childlike by family or friends who knew them closely beforehand, and that somewhat corroborates this theory. As a quick side note, Alzheimer's is often used synonymously with dementia, and while that's accurate in most cases, Alzheimer's is actually only a cause of dementia, albeit the most common one, while dementia is a general term for a decline in mental ability severe enough to interfere with daily life. I was always confused about this, and I've never seen it clarified in the videos I've watched on this topic, so there you go. With that out of the way, the fundamental quality of this disease to take away when studying it as a philosophical subject at least is dementia being a loss of identity of oneself and one's surroundings. Some of you may be wondering how it is that one's surroundings can lose its identity. Well, I consider identity to be incredibly subjective, such as the associations and memories that arise when you look at your surroundings. Take a look around you. Of course, you'll associate photographs, posters, or phone lock screens with very specific memories, but take a look at something as mundane as your desk, your couch, your bed, or your clothes, and without even realizing it, you've given identities to these objects on a subconscious level by associating them with a vague memory of touch or a recollection of how things smell. Perhaps a distant thought about an event that happened in the room you're in. And it's without these associations you give to those objects, to those surroundings, that their identity falls away. So when someone sees a picture of a liminal space for the first time, often they beg the question, why does this feel so familiar and yet so unrelated to me as an individual? Liminal spaces are often defined as the thresholds between one destination and the next, with the being in the threshold, whether it be a physical, emotional, or metaphorical threshold, arousing a very uncomfortable experience. Liminal spaces that have been popularized online and what you likely associate with the term seem to be taken up by the physical upon first glance. But what gives these liminal spaces their immense intrigue from most people is the uncomfortable emotional baggage that accompanies most of the images, often one of nostalgia or longing. While some point to the uneasy angles of camera shots, strange lighting, or unusually mundane subject matter of liminal spaces as being their strongest asset in making someone feel strange, the main quality I believe gives liminal spaces their nostalgic impact is their constant lack of people. The overwhelming feeling of loneliness is definitely emphasized by strange lighting or a certain location, but fundamentally what creates this feeling inside you is the missing faces of strangers passing by. These images are meant to exist as backgrounds to your everyday life. There is meant to be family around the dinner table. There are meant to be children running around the playgrounds. There are meant to be crowds roaming the shopping malls. Without them, you see nothing but the background and you feel nothing but loneliness and nostalgia. That sentimental longing or wistful affection for a period in the past. But what are you longing for? You've never been to these places, you've never walked these halls, you've never eaten at this restaurant, or have you? No, you haven't. But the somewhat beautiful thing is that you feel like you have, because you've spent most of your life subconsciously associating the malls you walk around, the dinner table you eat at, and the rooms you live in with the experiences you have in them with your friends and family. And thanks to the widespread effect of capitalism, most people in societies built under the system who live in the middle class, aka most likely you, have little trouble seeing similar restaurant styles, housing formats, and public space architecture being mirrored mirrored in popular liminal space images based off of the American lifestyle. Hell, it probably even gives more of an uneasy feeling, seeing something so close in similarity but not quite there. And I can definitely corroborate this as a South African who gets these feelings from popular liminal space images. It's because you constantly and subconsciously give identities to similar locations in your life that this nostalgic feeling for a place you've never been to overwhelms you. You see the mirrored architectural and stylistic decisions and you're presented with a feeling of unease because you're not sure why you feel connected to these places. It's because you feel connected to other places that structurally and stylistically mirror those liminal spaces that in your life you barely even take note of, because you are always consciously focused on the interactions you are having with the people in those places, or the specific objects in them, such as the furniture you sit on or the shelves you put your books on, rather than the background surroundings themselves. This is why photographs of nature with no people around don't elicit the same feelings. In the context of nature, you are often consciously focused on what would otherwise be considered the background. But what if you tried your absolute hardest to bring out the unease, the loneliness, the creepiness of liminal spaces above all else? Well, then you would get the Backrooms. The Backrooms, as I'm sure you know, are levels of reality that exist outside of the reality in which we live. Created and popularized by an anonymous 4chan post, these uneasy, unending rooms, hallways, staircases, and office spaces are the epitome of the loneliness you feel when looking at classical liminal spaces, because the Backrooms are liminal spaces at their creepiest. And thanks to the help of the online community, which continued to write and expand the concept past what is now known as Level 0, that unending sequence of mono-yellow rooms and buzzing fluorescent lights, we now have access to an incredibly creative, seemingly unending expansion of levels in the Backrooms. And if you find the concept as incredibly intriguing as I do, I would recommend this video by Creepy Demon that goes very much into depth on each level, sub-level, sub-layer, and entity. But for the sake of time and convenience, I'm going to hone in on levels 1 to 6 as well as level 0, all of which have a linear connection to each other. I'll also be taking you through a few other important notes to be aware of. For example, the term no clipping. The term is used to describe someone's entry into the Backrooms. It originates from glitches in video games which would allow you to phase through walls or floors to get to a place or view you were definitely not meant to be in or see. And images of this happening in video games often elicit a similar feeling of unease or unfinishedness to the Backrooms and liminal spaces in general, as these areas have an equally similar quality in being a backbone structure of a game that you were never meant to see or focus on, much like the quality of liminal spaces I mentioned earlier. According to the Backrooms lore, no clipping in real life results in you being thrust into the first level of the Backrooms, the one described earlier, level 0. And while it is possible to find littered exits around the levels of the Backrooms, making it back to reality after having spent time in them means that you are now far more susceptible to no-clipping back into that endless sequence of mono-yellow, meaning that whatever plans you had for living out the rest of your life are very likely to be cut short through no-clipping before you know it. So now that you've accepted your Backrooms fate, it's time to get a bit more acquainted with the levels. Level 0, as I mentioned earlier, is an endless series of mono-yellow rooms with overhead fluorescent lights emitting a constant hum-buzz noise. This level is often seen as a tutorial level, without many obstacles or noteworthy locations, allowing you to wander the endless rooms as you acclimatize as best you can to the situation you've been put in. After some time exploring the moist carpeted rooms of level 0, no clipping once again will cause you to enter into level 1. This level is known as the habitable zone, where you can survive relatively easily through supply crates scattered around the endless low-hanging warehouse structure level 1 exists in. Although it is a very habitable level, you are of course still in the Backrooms, with no hope of getting out for any real length of time. Finding a stairwell within level 1 is likely to lead you down to level 2 of the Backrooms, a level that consists of cramped maintenance tunnels, almost like a more compact version of level 1. Making your way through a fire exit in level 2 will bring you on to level 3, which consists of long, twisting hallways that are often very narrow, creating an even more compact feel than level 2. Through an elevator found in level 3, you can make your way down to level 4, a level which consists of endless empty office spaces, with almost no furniture and containing windows that are either completely blacked out or emit a glare too bright to see through. This level has many similarities to level 0 in design, but is missing key features such as the mono-yellow or the moist carpet of level 0, along with the addition of windows and doorways. Finding a basement entrance in level 4 can lead you into the Terra Hotel level, otherwise known as level 5. This infinite hotel's design stems from the 1930s and is filled with 1920s decorations and furniture. It has multiple areas including the boiler room and the main hall, which is known as the Eternal Ballroom. You can hear quiet, smooth jazz playing throughout the level. The only known entrance to level 6 is found within the boiler room area in level 5. Once you make it into level 6, otherwise known as Lights Out, you will find yourself shrouded in darkness, surrounded by hallways of brick flooring and metallic walls. Not that you could see them, however. It's barely possible to see your own hand in front of your face in this level, and it is by far the darkest level of the Backrooms, and it has the highest rate of wanderers losing their sanity. It is darkness itself. While there are levels both canonical and non-canonical according to the Backrooms wiki that go deeper than level 6, I find this level to be a fitting ending in describing the basics of the Backrooms, as it's where most wanderers would find their end anyway. The Backrooms is not the only big project that uses surroundings as a means of expressing this loss of sanity and identity. The greatest attribute I believe gave the film The Father its revered success is its attention to detail, specifically attention to what otherwise would be considered just background surroundings to harbor the main characters in. For those who don't know, The Father is a film which depicts dementia and its subjugation of somebody's mind on an incredibly expert level. The film uses both character and setting to give off the horror of a subjective loss of cognitive functioning, as we are taken through the film from the biased point of view of Anthony, an old man suffering from dementia. When I was introduced into the film, one thing that struck me was Anthony's constant desire to hold onto his wristwatch and to stay independent living in his own apartment. He antagonizes anyone else who could have hidden or stolen his watch, or anybody who threatens to move him out of his apartment. As Anthony interacts with characters throughout the film, his desire to hold on to that watch and that apartment is brought up again and again. Simultaneously, we as viewers have to piece together the life of Anthony through this incredibly biased perspective. The walls change color, the chairs change style, paintings go missing and events are out of order. While some things are directly pointed out to the viewer, such as a missing painting or a loop in the story, most subtle background changes are left to the audience to notice. This movie shows us, just as Liminal Spaces do, that the background to everyday life generally goes unnoticed, unless it's brought to the foreground on purpose. And while naturally characters play an integral part in this film, the use of set gives the movie a quality of unease. And while initially a viewer may think it's only due to the cast changes, character development, and the descent into forgetfulness, it's the subtleties in the background that help truly make the audience sympathize with notions patients with dementia might have, such as, was that always there, or I'm sure that was a different color. As I mentioned earlier, the main takeaway from studying dementia as a philosophical point of view is a loss of identity of one's surroundings and oneself. And while Anthony Hopkins' display as a mind coping with dementia is truly incredible and heart-wrenching, I see no better an example of an expression of that loss of self-identity than an artist, Willem Utermohlen. The great rift of contrast between these self-portraits displayed before you that you may have noticed is due to Utermohlen's exposure to dementia from 1995. As his dementia progressed, it became clear that these works portray a man doomed, yet fighting to preserve his identity and his place in the world in the face of an implacable disease, infringing on his mind and senses. With courage and perseverance, Utermohlen adapts his style and technique to the growing limitations of his perception and motor skills to produce images that communicate with clarity just how deep his predicament runs. To the very end, color, brushwork, and line retain their artistic and expressive vocation, the result of a lifetime dedicated to visual and psychological observation as an artist. I think the most terrifying aspect of Utermohlen's life is that he died in 2007, meaning that he had to endure living for 7 years in a mind that viewed himself in a form represented by this final sketch. But What if an artist didn't use such direct and relatable communication such as live action or self-portraits to display this disease? I believe the horror and confusion of dementia can be in some cases better displayed through abstract art, both of the visible and audible variety. This abstract artwork by Ivan Seal is one of a series of 6, created as album covers to accompany the caretakers everywhere at the end of time, a musical demonstration of the deterioration of memory, and what I consider to be the most expressive and effective form of displaying dementia through art. James Leland Kirby, otherwise known as the Caretaker, has for many projects worked closely alongside Ivan Seal, and for good reason. The project's overall effect would not be achieved without their combination. The 6.5-hour album Everywhere at the End of Time was released over the course of 3 or 4 years, finishing with stage 6 in 2019. However, the Caretaker has a long history with creating expressive and abstract music like this, dating back to Selected Memories from the Haunted Ballroom, released in 1999. His albums consist of old dance and ballroom records released anywhere from the 1920s to the 1940s that have been slowed down, distorted, reverberated, and broken apart into their musical components. To the average listener, many aspects of Everywhere at the End of Time 6.5 hours may seem unpleasant and repetitive, and as someone who has listened to all 6.5 of those hours, I can safely say that that is exactly the intention. The tracks of this album are meant to elicit a faraway nostalgic feeling, almost as if recollecting a memory from your childhood, and accompanied with distorted, faintly recognizable album cover art, Everywhere at the End of Time gives the listener an immersive experience, taking the minds of those with 6.5 hours to spare to the breaking point of what they could tolerate. I claim that Seal's cover art and the audio of Everywhere at the End of Time are inseparable in order to allow for a fuller experience. So as I go through these 6 stages presented by Leland Kirby's research into the science of dementia's slow and dreadful effect on the mind, take in the album cover art each stage is associated with. Stage 1. Here we experience the first signs of memory loss. This stage is most like a beautiful daydream, the glory of old age and recollection, the last of the great days. This stage takes up about 40 minutes of the album. Stage 2. The second stage is the self-realization and awareness that something is wrong with a refusal to accept that. More effort is made to remember so memories can be more long-form with a little more deterioration in quality. The overall personal mood is generally lower than the first stage and at a point before confusion starts setting in. This stage takes up about 40 minutes of the album as well. Stage 3. Here we are presented with some of the last coherent memories before confusion fully rolls in and the grey mists form and fade away. Finest moments have been remembered, the musical flow in places is more confused and tangled. As we progress, some singular memories become more disturbed, isolated, broken, and distant. These are the last embers of awareness before we enter the post-awareness stages. This stage takes up about 45 minutes of the album. Post-awareness stage 4 is where serenity and the ability to recall singular memories gives way to confusions and horror. It's the beginning of an eventual process where all memories begin to become more fluid through entanglements, repetition, and rupture. The stage lasts about 1.5 hours. Post-awareness stage 5. Confusions and horror. More extreme entanglements, repetition, and rupture can give way to calmer moments. The unfamiliar may sound and feel familiar. Time is often spent only in the moment leading to isolation. The stage lasts a grueling 1.5 hours as well. Finally, stage 6 is without description, but I feel that the title of one of the final tracks on the album says plenty enough. The long decline is over. This stage lasts the remaining 1.5 hours of the album. And when the final pieces of the Caretaker's 2-decade-spanning project was complete, he had one final message for his listeners. Thanks for the support through the years. May the ballroom remain eternal. C'est fini. Having explained these definite expressions of dementia through art which have specific references to the disease, liminal spaces may seem relatively disconnected from dementia as a concept. However, I believe liminal spaces and the Backrooms are a definite artistic expression of dementia, whether that was the intention or not. And I'll do my best to relay that by comparing it to what we can safely say are meant to be the definite expressions of dementia in art, specifically the last 3 topics I discussed. Let's take Everywhere at the End of Time as a framework, as it's probably the most widely known interpretation of dementia through art on the internet. The album consists of 6 stages, as explained earlier. However, before we start using the stages themselves as a structure, it's important to note what a core theme of Everywhere at the End of Time is: trying to hold on. whether that be holding on to one's self-control or one's memories. The reason the album is as long as it is because Kirby wanted to relay the dementia patient's desire to hold on to their identity and the identity of their surroundings. This is why the same melodies can be heard throughout the album, constantly being dragged out, heavily reverberated and overgrown with static. It is relaying the desire to hold on to the past. This core desire is seen mirrored in all previous artistic expressions of dementia I have covered. Utermohlen holds on to his ability as an artist, as his use of color, brushwork, and line retain their artistic and expressive vocation despite his mental decline. Anthony in The Father holds on to his watch and apartment as a final means of control in his descent into dementia. The Backrooms are an amazing metaphor for trying to hold on to how things were before a mental decline, constantly searching for a way out, only to descend deeper. And finally, Liminal Spaces showcase beautifully how overwhelming nostalgia can feel, that strong feeling of longing for the past, the desire to hold on to it. Two of these topics in particular, however, have a special connection, a connection that led me to make this video as I haven't seen it brought up on YouTube before, a connection between the Backrooms and Everywhere at the End of Time, and how their structures and themes so beautifully support one another. Firstly, the 6-stage, 6-level structure of each project have many parallels, and although many are no doubt unintentional, a few are blatant references. But let's begin with the concept of no-clipping. To paraphrase the explanation I gave earlier, after you enter the Backrooms, although you may make it out of them through some exit or other, you are far more susceptible to no-clipping back into them soon after returning to reality. I see this as a metaphor for the inability of a dementia patient to truly escape their horrific predicament. Although they may have moments of clarity, due to our current medical limits, those moments do not last, and eventually they fall into the depths of the disease, with no cure to lead a way out, much like the unavoidable continued descent into the levels of the Backrooms. This is what Level 0 is meant to represent, the space in which one might contemplate their descent rather than constantly trying to escape it, perhaps to find an escape in an ending, rather than in returning to how life once was. And although dementia patients rarely want to recognize that this disease will have such an effect on them, Level 0, or rather the space before the descent, is still available for them to contemplate this. The beginning of this ascent is the most comfortable. That recollection of the glory of the old days of Stage 1 is mirrored by the safety of Level 1, otherwise known as the habitable zone. This is the most comfortable you're going to get in the horror that is this descent. Level 2 and 3 of the Backrooms get more and more cramped and narrow, mirroring the increasing deterioration in quality and confused musical rhythm over the course of Stage 2 and 3. Level 4's office space mirrors Level 0 in many respects. This links the Backrooms to the theory of retrogenesis, as your surroundings decay and change in the reverse order of your birth into the Backrooms with Level 0. This homage to the beginning of your descent is also fitting for Stage 4, as all connections to clarity in that stage fall away to confusions and horror, with literally Synapse Retrogenesis being a name of one of the tracks in the confusion and horror stages. I find Level 5 of the Backrooms to have the closest links to Everywhere at the End of Time, starting with the design of the Infinite Hotel stemming from the 1930s and the interior being filled with 1920s decoration. As I mentioned, Kirby uses old records from this exact time period as the foundation of his work. The name of this level, Terror Hotel, also correlates perfectly with Stage 5, the most horrifically confusing stage in Everywhere at the End of Time, and in what I believe to be the most direct reference, the main area of Level 5 is dubbed the Eternal Ballroom, a direct reference to Kirby and his parting words to his listeners, which he wrote in the same year as the Backrooms were born. Finally, we have Level 6, a level shrouded in darkness and horror, the final resting place for the sanity of most wanderers, and Stage 6 is a perfect mirroring of this. The stage is no longer filled with chaotic, confusing noises, but rather the long drone after a heavy intensity has passed. And while Stage 6 is without description, if I could give it one, it would be this excerpt from Stage 5's description. The unfamiliar may sound and feel familiar. This one sentence not only perfectly encapsulates the goal of Everywhere at the End of Time, but also unsheaths the fundamental quality of liminal spaces, that the unfamiliar may look and feel familiar, both making you question the identity you associate with your surroundings and with yourself, and what it means to lose that identity.